Hello. How are you? My name's Gav. Maybe we've met before. Maybe we haven't. I'm a storyteller. It's a job. It's my job. And that's what I do. But I also like reading stories. And that's why this is called Armchair Readings. I'm going to read some stories to you as well. All sorts of different stories. Now we're going to start with a bit of a classic. But it does have a slightly different ending. And it's worth discussing, I think, as well. But this is the first of a few more. I shall be going to the classics. More about that. I also hope to be reading some stories for grown-ups. I'll be reading them live, and then they'll obviously be on my page on a playlist, and then I shall probably pop them up to YouTube as well. But today I'd like to read you this. It's from an old book that I've had quite some time. Now, you might not have this book, and I love a penguin. I love a penguin classic. Do you? Oh, that's me. I'm going to turn that off. I'm turning it off so I can see. I can see there's people here. I love a penguin classic. This is a very old design before the ones that we know. And so this is a book of fairy tales by Charles Perrault. Now, he was around quite a long time ago, a Frenchman, and he collected these folklore stories, and we refer to them as fairy tales. Now, these days, when we think fairy tales, we do think rather childishly that these are for children. And in fact, when this was first published in English, it had a title of Mother Goose stories. And immediately we think, oh, these are for children. But folk tales, they are not always for children, as you all know if you've seen anything that I've done live. Now, I love going back to the source material and seeing what is originally there. So it's very short. I'm going to read for you, as the title says, Little Red Riding Hood. It's a very short version, but it's got a different end. And also, I think, as is the way of these old versions of the stories, they're not always presented in a way that is, shall we say, current in our thinking and our approach. So I'm going to read for you, as it is called here, Le Petit Chaperon Rouge, Little Red Riding Hood. So there's no surprises here. There's no spoilers. We know what this is about, don't we? And it starts with this beautiful old woodcut. I wonder if you can see that there, which doesn't muck about really, does it? So, settle down, and I shall read to you Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time, there was a little girl, the prettiest you could hope to see. Her mother doted on her, and her grandmother was even more fond of her. The kind old woman had a little red hood made for her, which suited her so well that everyone called her Little Red Riding Hood. One day her mother baked some cakes and said to her, "Go and see how your grandmother is, for I hear she is ill. Take her a cake and this little pot of butter." I don't know why she didn't go herself, but Little Red Riding Hood set off at once to see her grandmother, who lived in another village. As she was going through a wood, she met Master Wolf, who had a great mind to eat her, but did not dare because of some woodcutters who were working nearby. He asked her where she was going. The poor child, who did not know that it was dangerous to stop and talk to a wolf, said, "I'm going to see my grandmother and taking her a cake and a little pot of butter from my mother." "Does she live very far from here?" said the wolf. "Oh, yes," said Little Red Riding Hood. "It's beyond that mill which you see over there, in the first house in the village." "Well," said the wolf, I'm going to see her too. I will go this way, and you go that way, and we will see who gets there first." The wolf ran off at full speed along the shortest path, while the little girl took the longest one, dawdling on the way to gather nuts, chase butterflies, and pick little bunches of wildflowers. The wolf soon reached the grandmother's house. He knocked rat-a-tat. "Who's there?" "It's your granddaughter, Little Red Riding Hood," said the wolf, imitating her voice. "I've brought you a cake and a little pot of butter from my mother." The grandmother, who was in bed because she was feeling rather poorly, called out, "Pull the catch and you'll loose the latch." The wolf pulled the catch and the door opened. He sprang on the old lady and devoured her in a twinkling. For he had nothing to eat for over 3 days. Then he shut the door and got into the grandmother's bed to wait for Little Red Riding Hood. Presently she arrived and knocked at the door, rat-a-tat. "Who's there?" At first, Little Red Riding Hood was afraid when she heard the gruff voice of the wolf, but then she thought that her grandmother must have a cold, so she answered, "It's your granddaughter, Little Red Riding Hood. I've brought you a cake and a little pot of butter from my mother." Making his voice a little less gruff, the wolf called out, "Pull the catch and you'll loose the latch." Little Red Riding Hood pulled the catch and the door opened. When the wolf saw her coming in, he hid himself under the bedclothes and said, "Put the cake and the little pot of butter on the bread bin and get into bed with me." The Little Red Riding Hood undressed and got into bed, but she was very surprised to see how her grandmother looked in her nightclothes. She said to her, "What big arms you have, grandmother, the better to hug you with, my dear. What big legs you have, grandmother, the better to run with, my child. What big ears you have, grandmother, the better to hear you with, my child. What big eyes you have, grandmother, the better to see you with, my child. What big teeth you have, grandmother, there to eat you with." So saying, that wicked wolf sprang on Little Red Riding Hood and ate her up. Now, those of you who know this story and are wondering why I've paused over dramatically this time, is because that's it. That's the end of the story. That's the story that Charles Perrault wrote. Now, it was hinted early in the story that there were woodcutters nearby, and perhaps you were thinking the woodcutter would come to the rescue, like in the version you know. But no. That's it. Little Red Riding Hood gets eaten. Of course she gets eaten. Because these stories were learning stories as well. This comes with a little moral. little bit of a moral there. This story teaches that the very young and little girls, more surely than the rest, we'll come to that in a bit, sweet dainty things clothed in their Sunday best, should never trust a stranger's artful tongue. Small wonder if these guileless young beginners provide the wolf with some of his best dinners. I say the wolf, for every wolf that roams is not the same. Some in appearance tame, gentle, well-mannered, affable and gay, trotting beside them in the friendliest way. Follow young ladies right into their homes. Alas, how many to their cost do find these plausible wolves are the most dangerous kind. So there you are. In this early version of Little Red Riding Hood, well, you tell me what it's trying to teach us. There's no woodcutter that comes to the rescue. I've always thought that was a bit weird anyway. Chopping up the wolf and out slithers, slaps the, bits or whole versions of Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother. Some versions on your shelf, the wolf, for some strange reason, puts the grandmother in the wardrobe. I mean, it's a wolf. What do you expect? Wolves eat things and they'll eat you. And I suppose if there was a moral to this story, is don't be so stupid. I mean, how many clues? I mean, she was a bit dim. Oh, that's not very fair, but what big eyes, what big ears, what big teeth, what big arms, what big legs. How many chances did the wolf give Little Red Riding Hood? It's aged badly. Lots of these stories, and I think the stories have got better for it, but lots of these early versions, unfortunately, well, if you were a female character, quite often you didn't have a name. Princess will do. Queen, grandmother, mother. I mean, we don't even know her name, just her nickname. And they're there to teach you a little bit. Teach you that there are wolves around that will devour you, not to trust them. And that's what interests me about these stories. I would like to read some of them to you. There's lots in here that you'll recognise. So I'll give you the titles. We've got The Sleeping Beauty. Oh, you know that one. The Master Cat, or Puss in Boots. Cinderella, or The Little Glass Slipper. The very famous Ricky with the Tuft. You know Ricky. Ricky with the Tuft. Ricky with the Tuft. I'll work my way through these, and every now and again I'll do them live. And if you're, we'll set up a little time to do that. This was a little bit of a tech test. I was actually going to be doing it outside, next to my wood pile, suggesting a woodcutter would come and save Little Red Riding Hood, but obviously we know they don't in this story. But then it started to tip it down with rain. I'll read these, and it'll be under the banner Armchair Readings. Now, sometimes during the day there will be this, and I mean, I didn't make any words up. Verbatim retellings of stories, these grim fairy tales, as we also know them. Charles Perrault was a couple of hundred years before the Grimm brothers. They borrowed heavily from him. And maybe a bit later of an evening, I quite fancy reading a few ghost stories, maybe. Maybe you're a bit more grown up, or those of you a bit less scared, which is often not the children. Children I find are a lot tougher than grown-ups. So armchair readings. If you see me going ready to go live as an armchair reading, it will be back here afterwards. I'll read my way through a few more. But the one I'm going to read you next is a story I don't tell. It's a story I don't tell when I go into schools or theatres, because it's irredeemably horrible, and I'd like to talk about that. I'll read it to you this week, possibly Friday. You'll get a notification if you click a reminder or like the page. It will tell you Bluebeard I'm going to read to you. Remember, it's a book of fairy tales. Fairy tales mean a little bit of magic, don't they? A little princess and happily ever after. Bluebeard. I'm not sure about the happily ever after. Perhaps you can see the etching, the wood cutting that goes with this. Anyway, I'm not sure you'll get sweet dreams after reading Bluebeard. Don't look it up. Well, one, I'll read it to you anyway. Two, it'll be too much. And if you are watching this in February, I'm telling stories, my reinterpretations of stories, on Saturday for the Leicester Comedy Festival, the UK Kids Comedy Festival, 2 p.m. You can find that on their webpage. And in fact, as we are today is Tuesday, my show is a competition. You go to their pinned tweet, UK Kids Comedy, on Twitter and Facebook. You can find their Facebook page. And if you can identify a place in Leicester from the photo, you get a chance of winning a free family ticket. And if you don't, well, it's a £5 for the whole family, 2 p.m. for an hour of stories and silliness on Saturday. I'll be giving away free badges for those of you that get involved on Saturday as well. Right, looking forward to it. Looking forward to reading you more stories. Looking forward to telling you more stories. Looking forward to the Leicester Comedy Festival, the UK Kids Comedy Festival. And thank you for watching. Would love to know what you think. I'd love to know what versions of the story you know. And what is your preferred ending? Do you like that Little Red Riding Hood didn't get away with it? Or do you think it's unfair? Leave a comment below and I'll reply. Take care of each other, and night-night. Sleep tight. I hope the bed bugs don't bite. Or the wolves. Not many wolves round here, I think.